The War Council convened in a dimly lit bunker, its members seated around a circular table piled with scattered maps and reports. The tension in the room was palpable as General Marcus Hayes stood at the head of the table, his weathered face illuminated by a flickering overhead bulb. He looked over the gathered officials, each one radiating skepticism. "We're running out of time," Hayes began, his gravelly voice cutting through the silence. "The Empire's forces are advancing faster than we anticipated. Our energy weapons are no match for their shields, and their drones pick off anything that moves. If we keep fighting on their terms, we'll lose." One of the younger commanders leaned forward, a faint smirk tugging at his lips. "And your solution is what? Dragging relics out of a museum? Mortars? Are you serious, General?" Hayes locked eyes with him. "Deadly serious. The very thing they mock us for is what will save us. Mortars don't rely on energy grids or complex targeting systems. They're simple, reliable, and most importantly, they exploit a vulnerability the Empire doesn't even know they have." The room erupted into murmurs. Some were incredulous, others dismissive. The idea seemed absurd. Mortars, crude, archaic weapons by any modern standard, were nothing more than a footnote in humanity's military history. "Let me remind you," Hayes continued, raising his voice, "that the Empire's technology is their strength, but it's also their blind spot. Their shields are calibrated for energy-based attacks, not kinetic impacts. They've never faced indirect fire. They won't even see it coming." The murmur subsided, though doubts still lingered. One of the senior strategists, a wiry man with sharp features, adjusted his glasses and cleared his throat. "Even if we entertain this idea, General, how do you propose we deploy these mortars? They've been out of commission for decades, and most of our troops have never even seen one, let alone used it." Hayes gestured toward a map pinned to the wall behind him, showing the projected route of the Empire's advancing forces. "We've got 2 weeks before they reach our front lines. That gives us enough time to train mortar teams and position them strategically along this corridor. We'll use the terrain to our advantage: valleys, ridges, choke points. Every mortar will be hidden, their crews operating in shifts. By the time the Empire realizes what's happening, it'll be too late." A heavy silence filled the room. Hayes could feel the weight of their hesitation, but he pressed on. "Look, I know this isn't what you expected. It's unconventional, even desperate. But desperate times call for desperate measures. And if this works, it won't just be a victory. It'll be a message. Humanity doesn't need to match the Empire's technology to outsmart them." After a long pause, the head of the council, an elderly woman with a steely demeanor, nodded slowly. "You've got 2 weeks, General. Make it count." The meeting adjourned, and Hayes immediately set to work. He dispatched teams to salvage and refurbish old mortars from abandoned depots and military museums, while others scoured archives for training manuals and schematics. Soldiers, both young recruits and seasoned veterans, were pulled into intensive training sessions. In a dusty warehouse, a group of soldiers huddled around a disassembled mortar, listening intently as an aging sergeant explained its operation. "It's simple," he said, slapping the cold metal tube. "You drop the shell in here. Gravity does the rest. Angle and distance are everything. Get those right, and you'll hit your target every time." At first, the training was riddled with mishaps. Shells misfired, calculations were off, and tempers flared. But as the days passed, the teams grew more proficient. Young soldiers who had never held anything heavier than a rifle became adept at handling the mortars, their confidence growing with each successful test. Hayes made frequent rounds to the training sites, offering words of encouragement and lending his expertise. He was a hands-on leader, and his presence motivated the troops. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, he stood by a firing range, watching a team hit their target dead-on. A rare smile crossed his face. "Good work," he said, clapping a young soldier on the shoulder. "Remember, precision wins battles, but adaptability wins wars. Keep that in mind out there." As the 2 weeks drew to a close, the mortars were ready, the teams were prepared, and the stage was set. Hayes stood before his assembled troops, his voice firm but resolute. You've trained hard, and you've proven yourselves. The Empire doesn't think we're capable of this. They think they've already won. Tomorrow we show them just how wrong they are." Cheers erupted from the soldiers, their morale high despite the daunting task ahead. For the first time in months, there was hope, a belief that they could turn the tide. That night, as Hayes reviewed the final plans in his quarters, he couldn't help but feel a twinge of pride. They had come a long way in a short time, and now it was up to them to make history. "They'll never see it coming," he murmured to himself, the faint sound of distant artillery tests echoing in the background. The Galactic Empire's commander, General Cthal, sat in his command ship's observation deck, overlooking the lush, green world beneath him. His scales glinted under the ambient light as he studied the planet's surface with disdain. Humanity's stubborn resistance had forced him to deploy ground troops, an insult to the Empire's technological superiority. This was supposed to be a simple conquest, not a prolonged skirmish. "These humans," Cthal hissed, his voice thick with contempt, clinging to their primitive ways. "They've delayed the inevitable, but their time has run out." The bridge officers nodded in agreement. The humans were a curiosity at best, a pest at worst. Their primitive projectile weapons and outdated tactics were no match for the Empire's precision energy weapons, adaptive shields, and automated drones. The very idea that they could mount a meaningful defense was laughable. A holographic display materialized before Cthal, showing the formation of his ground forces. Hover tanks floated in perfect symmetry, their energy shields glowing faintly. Infantry marched in tight, disciplined columns, encased in power armor designed to repel anything short of a direct artillery strike. Overhead, aerial drones patrolled the skies, scanning for any signs of resistance. "Progress?" Cthal demanded, his gaze fixed on the tactical officer. "Flawless, General," the officer replied. "Our troops have encountered minimal resistance. The human forces retreat with every advance. Their defenses are crude at best." Cthal allowed himself a rare smile, though it quickly faded. "Retreating, yes. But to where? Humans are cunning creatures, despite their inferiority. They adapt like vermin." He paused, his eyes narrowing. "Order a full scan of the surrounding terrain. I want every possible hiding place identified." The officer hesitated. "General, their weaponry is incapable of penetrating our shields. Even if they were planning an ambush, they would need something far beyond their capabilities to pose a threat." "Do not mistake my caution for fear," Cthal snapped. "Arrogance has cost other commanders dearly. I will not make the same mistake." Despite Cthal's insistence, the Empire's doctrine had bred complacency. Their shields and countermeasures had rendered projectile weapons obsolete centuries ago. The thought of humans using such primitive methods was dismissed as desperation, an act of defiance before their inevitable defeat. As the alien forces advanced, their formations remained rigid and predictable. Their reliance on technology was evident in every movement. Automated systems directed troop placement, while advanced sensors scoured the area for energy signatures. Yet this precision left them blind to the unorthodox. Meanwhile, the human trenches and bunkers appeared deserted, a ruse orchestrated with meticulous care. Cthal's forces marched through valleys and ridges, unaware they were funneling themselves into carefully chosen kill zones. The first sign of unease rippled through the ranks when the drones detected faint heat signatures below ground, too scattered to warrant concern. "Buried equipment, perhaps," one officer suggested. "Nothing significant." Cthal waved it off. "Irrelevant. Humans are scavengers. They dig and hide like rodents. Press forward." On the ground, alien infantry moved with mechanical precision, their steps synchronized and shields shimmering faintly. The hover tanks glided effortlessly over uneven terrain, their cannons trained on distant horizons. The confidence of the Empire was palpable. This was not a battle to them, but a routine sweep. Cthal observed their progress from the safety of his command vessel. His confidence was absolute, bolstered by centuries of imperial dominance. The idea that humans could surprise him was inconceivable. As the Empire's forces closed in on a dense ridge line, a junior officer hesitated, scanning the holographic map. General, this area, the topography is unusual. Narrow passes, high ridges. It's an ideal location for an ambush. Kthal sneered. An ambush with what? Rocks and sticks?
Proceed with the advance.
The officer obeyed, though unease lingered. The ground forces pushed deeper into the ridge, their formations unwavering. The humans had left no visible signs of resistance, no mines, no fortifications, nothing to suggest they were prepared for a confrontation. But Kthal's confidence masked his inability to see the truth. He didn't understand humanity's history of asymmetrical warfare, their capacity to turn weakness into strength. The Empire's overwhelming firepower had lulled them into a false sense of security, blinding them to the ingenuity that had kept humanity alive for centuries. As night fell over the battlefield, the Empire's forces made camp, their positions lit by the faint glow of energy shields. The officers gathered in mobile command centers, poring over maps and preparing for the next day's march. Kthal addressed his subordinates through a secure channel. Tomorrow, we reach the human stronghold. Their resistance will crumble, and this planet will be ours. Ensure the troops are ready to deploy shock tactics. Let us remind them of the Empire's might. On the ground, alien soldiers relaxed within the safety of their shields, their vigilance waning. Drones patrolled lazily overhead, scanning for energy signatures, but ignoring the terrain itself. They had grown accustomed to unchallenged dominance, their arrogance blinding them to the subtle signs of impending disaster. As the alien forces prepared for what they believed would be their final push, the humans waited in silence, their mortars primed and hidden. The Empire's hubris had led them exactly where humanity wanted them, and the stage was set for a lesson the galaxy would never forget. The first shell dropped silently from the sky, unnoticed until it landed with a deafening explosion in the heart of the Empire's infantry formation. The ground shook violently, and the perfectly aligned columns of alien soldiers scattered in confusion. The Empire's shields flickered briefly, overwhelmed by the kinetic force of the impact. For a moment, silence reigned as the aliens stared at the smoke rising from the crater, their disbelief palpable. Then came the second shell, followed by a third. Within seconds, the sky rained fire. Panic rippled through the alien ranks as explosions tore through their formations. The mortars struck with pinpoint accuracy, each shell detonating in devastating bursts of shrapnel. Hover tanks, once thought invincible, were flipped like toys. Infantry shields collapsed under the relentless barrage, their technology useless against the sheer physical force of the projectiles. Incoming fire detected, a frantic voice echoed through the Empire's command network. Multiple trajectories, projectile-based. General Kthal's calm demeanor cracked as he watched the chaos unfold on his holographic display. Impossible. No primitive weapon could achieve this level of precision. Identify the source. But the source remained elusive. The humans had hidden their mortar teams well, positioning them deep within the natural cover of the terrain. Every volley came from a different location, and by the time the Empire's drones locked onto one, the crew had already moved to a secondary position. On the ground, alien officers barked orders, trying to regroup their shattered units. Soldiers attempted to deploy countermeasures, but their energy weapons were useless against indirect fire. The drones, designed to detect energy signatures, struggled to pinpoint the cold, inert mortar tubes. The chaos only intensified as the humans began their second phase. From the ridges above, infantry teams emerged, firing rifles and launching rockets at the disoriented alien troops. The Empire's disciplined formations devolved into disarray, their soldiers caught between the unrelenting mortar fire and the sudden close-quarters assault. Kthal slammed his claws against the command console, his frustration mounting. Order the drones to sweep the entire region. I want those launchers destroyed. The drones descended, scanning the terrain with infrared sensors. They found traces of heat signatures, recently abandoned mortar positions, but the humans had planned for this. Decoy installations littered the battlefield, each one rigged with false signals to draw enemy fire. The drones wasted precious time targeting these fakes, while the real mortar teams continued their relentless assault. Shell after shell rained down, the explosions echoing through the valleys. The Empire's forces, so confident in their technological superiority, were reduced to scrambling for cover. Hover tanks, their shields overwhelmed, exploded in fiery plumes. Alien soldiers abandoned their formations, seeking shelter where none existed. Amidst the carnage, General Hayes stood with his command team, watching the battle unfold through binoculars. His face was grim, his voice steady as he issued orders. Keep them moving. Don't let them regroup. If they think they've found us, relocate immediately. The mortar crews followed his instructions to the letter. They operated with mechanical precision, firing a few rounds before dismantling their equipment and disappearing into the terrain. The Empire's forces were chasing shadows, their every move anticipated and countered. On the battlefield, an alien officer screamed into his comms, his voice barely audible over the explosions. "We need reinforcements." "The humans are." His transmission cut off abruptly as a mortar shell landed nearby, obliterating his position. In the Empire's command ship, Kthal's frustration boiled over. "Deploy the reserves. I want every available unit on the ground now." But even the reserves could not stem the tide. The humans fought with a tenacity that defied logic, their guerrilla tactics exploiting every weakness in the Empire's rigid strategies. Mortars continued to fall like clockwork, each explosion a reminder of the Empire's failure to anticipate such a simple yet effective weapon. As the battle raged, Kthal's confidence turned to desperation. He issued order after order, but nothing worked. His soldiers were unprepared for this kind of warfare, their advanced technology rendered useless against humanity's unpredictable tactics. In a last-ditch effort, Kthal ordered his forces to retreat to a more defensible position. But the humans were relentless, pressing their advantage with unyielding ferocity. The mortar teams pushed forward, their fire guiding the infantry's advance. Every step the Empire's forces took was met with resistance, every retreat covered by explosions. Hours passed, and the once proud alien army was reduced to scattered remnants. Smoke and fire filled the air, the battlefield littered with wreckage and bodies. The Empire's forces, so accustomed to victory, were now fighting for survival. As the sun dipped below the horizon, the mortar fire finally ceased. The silence was deafening, broken only by the distant cries of wounded soldiers. General Hayes stood atop a ridge, his gaze fixed on the battlefield below. He spoke softly, more to himself than anyone else. "They thought they were untouchable. They thought they could break us. But they never understood what we're capable of." In the Empire's command ship, Kthal stared at the carnage in disbelief. His forces had been decimated, his reputation shattered. He slumped into his chair, his claws trembling. How? How could this happen? But there was no answer, only the stark reality of his defeat. The Galactic Empire, for all its technological might, had been outsmarted by a species they had deemed inferior. Humanity had shown them the power of ingenuity, and the lesson would not be forgotten. The battlefield lay in eerie silence as the smoke began to clear, revealing the full extent of the Empire's devastation. Alien soldiers, once disciplined and imposing, now huddled in scattered groups, their armor battered and their morale shattered. Hover tanks lay in twisted heaps, their advanced systems rendered useless. The air reeked of burning metal and scorched earth, a testament to the relentless human assault. General Hayes stood at the edge of a ridge, his binoculars lowered. His face bore no trace of triumph, only a grim determination. This was not just a victory, it was a statement. The Galactic Empire had underestimated humanity, and now they were paying the price. He turned to his communications officer, his voice firm but calm. "Send the signal. Let them know we're ready to negotiate." In the Empire's command ship, General Kthal received the message with a mix of disbelief and rage. Negotiation was a concept foreign to the Empire, a concession they rarely entertained. Yet, as he stared at the reports streaming in, the losses were undeniable. His forces were decimated, their supply lines disrupted, and their morale at an all-time low. He clenched his claws, the weight of failure pressing down on him. "Open a channel," Cthal growled, his pride bitterly swallowed. "Let us hear their terms." The transmission flickered to life, revealing Hayes standing against a backdrop of rugged terrain. His expression was calm, his posture confident. "General Cthal," he began, "your forces are surrounded. Your shields are compromised. Continuing this fight will only result in more unnecessary losses, for both sides." Cthal narrowed his eyes, his tail flicking in irritation. "And what is it you propose, human? Surrender? Capitulation?" Hayes shook his head. "Not surrender. Survival. This planet is ours, and we will defend it at any cost. But that doesn't mean we're unwilling to talk. Withdraw your forces, leave our world, and we'll let you go in peace. Continue to fight, and you'll lose everything." The alien general's pride bristled at the ultimatum, but he could not deny the truth in Hayes's words. The Empire had always relied on overwhelming power to crush its enemies, but here, against this stubborn species, their tactics had failed. Still, he could not simply concede without making a final attempt to assert control. "You are bold, human," Cthal said, his voice low and measured. "But do not mistake this defeat for weakness. The Empire has vast resources. If we leave now, it will not be out of fear, but strategic necessity. We will return, stronger than before." Hayes met his gaze without flinching. "And we'll be ready. The choice is yours, General. Take your soldiers home, or leave them to die here." The channel went silent as Cthal considered his options. His claws tapped rhythmically against the console, the weight of the decision pressing heavily upon him. Finally, he turned to his officers, his voice carrying the sharp edge of reluctant acceptance. "Order the retreat. We will regroup and reassess." The command spread quickly through the remaining alien forces. Hovercraft engines sputtered to life, carrying battered units back toward the safety of their orbiting fleet. Ground troops fell back in hurried columns, their movements disorganized but obedient. The Empire's once proud invasion force now resembled a defeated rabble, retreating under the watchful eyes of the victorious humans. Hayes watched the withdrawal from his vantage point, his expression unreadable. He turned to his second-in-command, who stood beside him, rifle slung over his shoulder. "They'll be back," the younger officer said, his tone laced with both relief and apprehension. "I know," Hayes replied. "But when they do, they'll think twice about underestimating us." In the following days, humanity worked tirelessly to rebuild and regroup. The mortar teams, hailed as heroes, were celebrated for their ingenuity and resilience. Soldiers shared stories of their harrowing encounters, their camaraderie strengthened by the shared experience. Engineers began analyzing the captured remnants of alien technology, seeking ways to integrate it into their own arsenal. The victory had given humanity more than just a reprieve. It had provided valuable insights into the Empire's vulnerabilities. Meanwhile, in the depths of space, Cthal stood before the Emperor himself, a towering figure cloaked in shadows. The air was heavy with tension as Cthal recounted the events of the failed invasion. "They exploited our blind spots," Cthal admitted, his voice heavy with shame. "Their tactics were crude but effective. They adapted faster than we anticipated." The Emperor's voice was cold and devoid of sympathy. "You were defeated by a species with inferior technology. This failure will not go unpunished." Cthal lowered his head, his claws curling into fists. "With your permission, I request another chance to rectify this. Allow me to study their methods, to learn their weaknesses. The next time we face them, there will be no retreat." The Emperor regarded him in silence for a long moment before finally speaking. "Very well. But remember, General, the Empire does not tolerate failure. Do not disappoint me again." As Cthal departed, the weight of his mission hung heavily on his shoulders. The humans had proven themselves more resourceful than he had imagined, and he knew that the next encounter would be even more challenging. Back on Earth, Hayes and his team prepared for the inevitable. The victory had bought them time, but they knew it was only a matter of time before the Empire returned. Humanity had sent a message, but the war was far from over. Standing in the ruins of the battlefield, Hayes gazed at the horizon, his mind already racing with plans for the future. "They think they can break us," he said quietly, more to himself than anyone else. "But they have no idea what they've started." The lessons of the battle would not be forgotten. Humanity had shown the galaxy that strength was not measured by technology alone but by the will to survive and adapt. And as they braced for the challenges ahead, one thing was certain: the Galactic Empire would never look at humanity the same way again.